After America is made on the lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Emma Shortis and this is After America. The illegal US-Israel war on Iran continues, with no end in sight. There is no plan for the end of this war, no clear objective but the use of force. The Trump administration didn't even have a plan to evacuate its own citizens from the region. And Australia is part of it, whether we like it or not.
An American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death.
Last weekend, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announced that an American fast attack submarine had sunk an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean, killing at least 80 people and leaving the rest to drown. 32 people were rescued by the Sri Lankan Navy. This immediately raised questions about Australian involvement. As part of the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine agreement, Australian crew are embedded in American Virginia-class submarines. After initially refusing to be drawn, on Friday, Australian time, Prime Minister Albanese confirmed that 3 Australian crew were in fact on board the submarine behind this attack.
I can confirm that there were 3 Australian personnel on board that vessel. I can confirm also, though, that no Australian personnel have participated in any offensive action against Iran.
It's still not clear what was so secret on Thursday that was not secret enough on Friday for the Prime Minister to continue to keep it secret. And the government can dance around as much as it likes. There are no passengers on nuclear-powered submarines. Not participating is not a thing. And this is what AUKUS does. The deal has dragged Australia into the Trump administration's illegal war on Iran in all but name. And this was entirely foreseeable. We'll be bringing you more analysis of all of this next week with a special crossover episode of After America and Follow the Money, which will drop on Wednesday, Australian time. In the meantime, we've got an extra one for you. 1,000,000 years ago, last Friday, I spoke with friend of the show Liz Pancotti about the State of the Union and Trump's economy. As ever, there are no neat dividing lines between Trump's foreign policy and how he behaves domestically. His vile attack on Somali-Americans and his preposterous claim that benefit fraud is responsible for the US budget deficit is just one example. But it's a long list. In the MAGAverse, it's white men who are born to rule, at home and abroad. We pick up the conversation with Liz telling me about the state of the US economy a little over 1 year into the second Trump administration.
You know, the president has, on Tuesday night and for much of his first year back in office, has touted his economic achievements. So there are actually few real achievements to brag about. And so he seems to fudge the numbers or lie or strategically point to things. A couple examples come to mind. One is he cited a couple of job creation numbers in the State of the Union that were just wrong. Like they're just the wrong number, which is kind of funny. But we have really seen the labor market stall over the past year. Unemployment is hovering, between 4 and 4.5%, not concerningly high. But when we look under the hood, we are really seeing a lot of cracks. Manufacturing employment has declined a ton over the past year, despite really increasing in the last few years of the Biden administration. We have seen long-term unemployment tick up, so workers who are out of jobs for more than 6 months, which we know has really long-term damaging effects on workers and their careers in general. We have really seen job creation only be driven by the healthcare sector, which is just not sustainable, especially as Medicaid cuts that were included in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last summer, the Republican budget law, as those start to kick in, we are already seeing rural hospitals close. And so the fact that, all job growth in the country is hinging on this one sector that is about to be pummeled by fiscal policy cuts is really unsustainable. And then outside of that, the president has pointed to how he has kept his campaign promise to lower prices on day one, and he's beat inflation, prices are down, and affordability is a hoax by Democrats, and yada, yada. It's really
What was it?
interesting.
Affordability. Someone told them to use this word.
Yes. He also said groceries. What a strange word. I haven't used that word in a long time. I haven't heard it. But in Tuesday night's speech, I saw that there were a couple folks who tallied up how much time he actually spent talking about the economy or talking about affordability, and it was really just a couple of minutes out of the nearly 2-hour speech.
Yeah.
One thing that stuck out to me was, the president has floated some more populist economic policies over the past year. Most recently, we've seen him push, a 10% cap on credit card interest rates. For data centers, AI data centers, he has talked about bring your own power plant policies for those to try to limit increases in utility bills. But the thing he seemed to, only really new thing that he seemed to launch in his State of the Union, which is really the time for the president to kind of stake out their vision for America. And in many cases, presidents have used the opportunity to roll out kind of landmark proposals that they hope to turn into law. And the really only new one he seemed to focus on were these expanded retirement accounts. That is kind of an expansion of a policy that was signed into law by President Joe Biden a couple of years ago. I think retirement security is like a perennial problem in the United States. There are many, many folks who don't have enough saved for retirement. Seniors, in many cases, live on too low fixed incomes. And we are facing a Social Security budget shortfall here in the next few years. But I think most people are just worried about paying their groceries. It's really hard for especially someone my age or someone your age to think about, are we going to be financially secure in retirement? Because it's hard to pay to put food on the table for your family. And so it's interesting that those seem to escape from the president's brag sheet. Is he couldn't talk about lowering grocery prices because he hasn't. He, after the inflation print, I think a month or two ago, he went on kind of a campaign style stump speech to, I think, Iowa or Pennsylvania, and talked about how prices has come down, and he highlighted a couple of prices, and one of them was sports tickets. That's if you just simply take the inflation print, the inflation report, and you sort in the Excel file, biggest decrease at the top, sports tickets is the highest one. And I was like, oh, I think sports tickets are down because no one's buying them, because no one can afford to go to a football game because they can't put groceries on the table. So I don't know. That was my assessment of the State of the Union. A lot of it really, really didn't focus much on the economy or on economic policies, and certainly not on affordability. There were, some comments about there was quite a few comments about the Olympics, and obviously about foreign policy and immigration policy. But the gist, the State of the Union in our brains is unaffordable.
Let me just tell you, the US Supreme Court has ruled against Donald Trump's global tariffs enacted back in April.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed. We had a little complicating factor with tariffs the other day with the Supreme Court. They did the wrong thing, but it didn't make any difference because we have another way of doing it. And as time goes by, I believe the tariffs paid for by foreign countries will, like in the past, substantially replace the modern-day system of income tax, taking a great financial burden off the people that I love.
One of the things he did mention, though perhaps not as much as we were expecting around the economy, was, of course, tariffs and that decision by the Supreme Court. Unsurprisingly, he's not relenting on tariffs, and a lot of that is driving, what you were just describing. But he even at one point said that tariffs might replace income tax. What is that about?
This has been a policy that was floated a little bit as part of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. I think Trump's fascination with tariffs, as I understand it, comes from he read a biography of President McKinley and thought it was really cool and has just become really obsessed with them. I think in the last week, by the time we were recording this, the Supreme Court decision was about a week ago, striking down those emergency tariffs. And within hours, the president, came on and gave a press conference talking about how he would instead implement Section 122 tariffs, which are a kind of flat global tariff on all imports. There is actually a lengthy list of exclusions. He at first floated that it would be 10% across the board. He then, not 24 hours later, Truth Social that it would be 15%. We've yet to see kind of the final chips fall from the White House on official executive orders implementing those. So to be determined there. But, I think that His landmark legislative achievement is an extremely unpopular tax bill that primarily cuts taxes for the wealthy. I saw a report out this week that showed for folks making less than 100K, it's, maybe you're getting a couple $100 at most out of tax changes from this. And yet those making over $200,000 will get a $2,000 bump in their tax refunds this year. For the very wealthy, they are getting massive tax breaks. And for average Americans, it really won't make much of a difference, except when you compound it with the fact that they are losing, subsidies that help millions of Americans pay for healthcare, or losing, Medicaid or food stamp benefits here in the next couple of years as a result of those cuts. It is, on balance, really a huge decline for those folks. But I think this like idea that we would stop collecting federal revenue entirely and switch to from the tax code and switch to a tariff-based one, there's just like truly not enough tariff revenue. Like, I think unless you had tariffs over several 100%, you could not make up the actual difference there in revenue. And we know, based on what's happened over the past year, that most of these tariffs are passed through in the form of higher prices. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York has a report out a couple of weeks ago showing that about 90% of the impact of tariffs has been burdened onto American consumers and American businesses. This idea that Trump has floated that only, foreign companies and exporters in foreign countries pay, these is just factually inaccurate. And we know that the rich don't pay their taxes, and Donald Trump has helped them do so. They either claim large tax breaks, they exploit loopholes, or they, just simply amass a bunch of wealth and pass it on to their kids and don't ever spend it. And so a consumption-based tax, which is effectively what a tariff-based system would look like, would just be extremely regressive, like even more than our already very regressive tax code is, especially kind of enhanced by the regressivity was enhanced by that tax bill last year. So again, not very popular. Like, he seems to keep throwing these proposals out that are just not what the American people want. And his approval on tariffs, on inflation, on the economy are all just really in the tank, even as his overall approval plummets. His approval on those specific things is typically tracking lower than his overall approval. And so the economy is, I think, his weakest thing. And he keeps putting more stuff out there that is less and less popular.
He is, though, a master at redirecting blame for all of that, away from himself and away from those, billionaires who are consolidating your wealth that you mentioned there. During the State of the Union, he tried to he almost seemed to try and pin the entire deficit on the Somali-American community, which is a community that he and the MAGA movement have been focused on for a little while now.
But when it comes to the corruption that is plundering, it's plundering America. There's been no more stunning example than Minnesota, where members of the Somali community have pillaged an estimated $19 billion from the American taxpayer. Oh, we have all the information. So tonight, although started 4 months ago, I am officially announcing the war on fraud to be led by our great Vice President J.D. Vance. And if we're able to find enough of that fraud, we will actually have a balanced budget overnight. It'll go very quickly. That's the kind of money you're talking about. We'll balance our budget. The Somali pirates who ransacked Minnesota remind us that there are large parts of the world where bribery, corruption, and lawlessness are the norm, not the exception. Importing these cultures through unrestricted immigration and open borders brings those problems right here to the USA, and it is the American people who pay the price in higher medical bills, car insurance rates, rent, taxes, and perhaps most importantly, crime.
I mean, Trump's obviously always been appallingly racist, but the brazenness of that, I think, should still be shocking. And it is an effort, is clearly an effort to do that redirection of blame away from him. And I mean, that's not unusual in the history of US politics. Trump's just particularly good at it. Do you think, I mean, you mentioned his unpopularity there. Do you think, though, that redirection of blame against non-white Americans is still working for him?
It's a good question. I'll take tariffs as an example of this in one particular case. But when we have asked people, we do a lot of polling with a couple of different polling partners. But when we ask voters, Who do you blame for higher prices? Who do you blame for your higher electricity bill? Who do you blame for prices at the grocery store? Who do you blame for your paycheck in real terms, inflation adjusted terms declining? For the most part, people understand that this is Donald Trump's economy. In our increasingly polarized society, when you ask a Democrat how they feel about a Republican, they say bad. And when you ask a Republican how they feel about a Republican, they say okay. But we are starting to see the cracks in the Republican Party and in that base. And among independents, they are largely swinging against Trump across the board. Specifically in kind of this benefit fraud. Somali-Americans in Minnesota is one example. Over the summer when the Republicans were trying to put forward sweeping, just devastating Medicaid cuts, they pointed to fraud. In the first 2 months of President Trump's second term, Elon Musk came in and pledged to cut the federal expenditures by trillions of dollars and find all these savings and all these pennies in the couch cushion, largely driven by fraud. And they've blamed immigrants. They've blamed, poor Americans who are rightfully accessing these benefits that they're entitled to. It is just not that's just not the problem. We know for a fact that when we look at these programs, in fact, when we look at who doesn't pay their taxes or who cheats on their taxes, it is the wealthy. When we look at who defrauds public programs, in many cases, it is very wealthy, government contractors and consultants who are paid a lot of money and who don't deliver on the things that taxpayer dollars go towards. The vast majority of corruption in our government is not, in fact, driven by, working Americans who are just trying to get by and get a little help. And in many cases, they can't. I was really struck. Medicaid work requirements are one thing that comes to mind too. In the first Trump administration, I think we talked about this maybe last time I was on, but in the first Trump administration, there was an experiment, a pilot program in a couple of states where they rolled out work requirements for Medicaid, which are really just paperwork requirements. They're just submit a bunch of forms to the federal government or to the state government to ensure that you're eligible for these benefits. And it was so expensive. I mean, there were tech companies that got millions of dollars in government funds to set up the programs to take on this paperwork. The programs didn't work. All of these tech programs were terrible. I mean, I remember in one state, there weren't even phone lines for several months. You had to submit things on the internet and this was in, the kind of late 2010s. And not all people who are eligible for Medicaid have reliable access to high-speed internet or a computer. And so these systems were just completely built to fail the people who had to use them, and yet all the tech companies who built them, made out like bandits with taxpayer dollars that ultimately would kick them off their health and kick deserving beneficiaries off their health insurance. It's the same story. I think one thing that Donald Trump has been really successful with, unfortunately, going back to his 2016 campaign, is, like you said, he is a wealthy person and, he owns golf courses and skyscrapers, and he has somehow kind of pitched himself as this populist who is actually taking on the establishment and taking on the wealthy and yada, yada. And it's just not what his policies do. I mean, point blank, it's not what his policies do. And even on these more populist proposals he's put forward, 10% credit card interest cap, various things with mortgages, investor-owned housing, banning investor-owned housing. He doesn't follow through on any of them. The things he follows through on are kicking millions of people off their health care. And so it's one thing for him to, post a Truth Social post taking on Wall Street, and it's another for him to invite tech CEOs to his inauguration and give tax handouts to big investors. And I think people are really starting to, especially the people who were kind of with him for a long time, are really starting to see the cracks in his authenticity on this and his follow through on this, and him just really failing to put his money where his mouth is.
Yeah. I guess the reason that Trump exists in that way, that he could get so rich and that those tech CEOs were in the position they were in, though, is, the result clearly of decades of really bipartisan failure to address those structural inequalities that you were talking about. And Trump is accelerating them in a really dangerous way. But that failure was kind of, I guess, baked in. Do you think Democrats are offering a viable alternative to Trump's economy, one that would address those structural issues that you're outlining as well?
It's a good question. I worked in the Senate for Senator Bernie Sanders, so I can tell you at least one person is and has been doing it for far longer than President Trump was doing it on the campaign trail. I don't know if you can see, there's a old Bernie poster on the back of our office, but it's a good question. I think Democrats, there's a couple things. One is that I think we are just really, at least in DC, with the wind in our sails from the election of Mayor Zoran Mamdani in New York City, and some of the gubernatorial candidates and other races in the fall's election, and as we head into the midterm elections this fall. I think that Democrats are realizing that they have to do more than just say, like, no Trump bad, that they have to be for something. And so they really spent, a lot of folks in town spent a lot of time over the past year saying, we stand against Trump's tariffs, or we stand against his, immigration raids, or we stand against his tax law, blah, blah, blah. Like, there was a lot of that. And I think we have seen some really exciting green shoots in the last few months where Democrats are really coming around to two things. One, understanding they have to be for something. And two, understanding that it is not enough to serve up the same policies that would put money in the pockets of ultimately those, the same billionaires and tech CEOs backing Donald Trump. When you increase, I'll take food for an example. So grocery prices are a huge concern for many Americans. And I think probably even for Australians and around the world. It's just, post-pandemic, grocery prices are really crazy everywhere. And so there's a couple things you can do to make sure that people can afford groceries. One is you can lower the prices of groceries. And two is you can, especially for the most poor Americans or low-income Americans, we have food stamp benefits that help people afford groceries. And the issue with just simply increasing food stamp benefits is that doesn't bring prices down. So it affects only the people who receive those, which is 20-ish% of people. But also then the big ag companies and the meat packers who control so much of the industry, and Walmart and big corporations that control our food supply, their profit margins don't decrease. In fact, they probably increase as a result of increasing those. And so another proposal is to actually bring food prices down. And so my colleague Alex and I wrote a proposal about a year ago for the Roosevelt Institute based on a policy that AMLO and President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico have put forward, where they worked with food suppliers. So on the agriculture side, on the transportation side, on the retail side, on the manufacturing side, to kind of coordinate voluntary price controls to offer a basket to Mexicans of kind of basic goods: tortillas, beans, rice, canned tuna. I mean, nothing like super extravagant or fancy, but it'll feed your family. And it is roughly $45 a week. It's about 900 pesos, which kind of maps to about $45 US. And so, we put forward that proposal about a year ago. And then this past week, the Center for American Progress, which is kind of a center-left think tank here in town, put forward a similar proposal to cap grocery prices from increasing any further. So it wouldn't bring them down, but it would cap them. And so we are starting to see quite a bit of Hill interest. Our executive director, Lindsay Owens, was speaking with a bunch of House of Representatives members in the Democratic caucus yesterday, proposing exactly this. And there was a lot of interest in the room on how do we bring grocery prices down. And so, 5-10 years ago, I think even 3 years ago, the prevailing policy in the Democratic Party would have been to increase SNAP benefits. And SNAP, which is our Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps, is a great program that makes sure a lot of people can afford to eat and have groceries on their kitchen tables. But they are really, really wrangling with the idea that we have to take on corporate power, that it is not enough to merely fight poverty by throwing money at the problem, and that we have to take on the corporations who are behind it. And that's just one example where I think we're really seeing a lot of interest. But I think across the board, we have seen Democrats from the very center, just right up to it, and all the way over to the most progressive members across the board. We are seeing a lot more people really catch on to the idea that they have to take on corporate power, and they have to take on massive inequality in our economy and the ramifications it has. And I think that's really important that we've made progress there.
Yeah, that's really exciting and kind of reflective of the fact that Trump is so appalling and so radical creates this opportunity that might not otherwise exist. And it is possible to seize that. So that is really exciting. Liz, just before we go, I wanted to ask you about another one of those drivers of inequality that Trump has kind of been focused on in his weird way. Like a million years ago in January, his administration threatened a criminal indictment of Jerome Powell, the outgoing chair of the Federal Reserve, which is the equivalent of Australia's Reserve Bank. But Powell's response was particularly strong. Like, it was a very interesting example of the different kinds of resistance to Trump and Trumpism.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people. Thank you.
I'm not sure about you, but it felt quite unusual to see a public official resist so strongly and so publicly.
Powell is an interesting one. So for those who maybe don't know, the head of our central bank, Jerome Powell, was actually appointed by Trump in his first term. He was originally an appointee, and then President Biden re-upped his nomination. But he was originally a Trump appointee. He is a bona fide Republican. He's a businessman. He's actually not technically an economist. One of, I think, maybe the first Fed chair who isn't a PhD holding economist. And I think that in particular, I don't know, the Jay Powell thing, I don't know how many people, probably not that many in Australia, closely follow Jay Powell, but like one funny thing is that over the weekend that this happened, one of the members of the Grateful Dead, who is Jay Powell's favorite band, passed away over that weekend. And so when the video came out on Sunday night of him, very forcefully denouncing President Trump's threat of a criminal investigation, all I could think about was the fact that like this guy's hero just passed away and he's having to record this video. So that was all funny. It also comes Jerome Powell criminal investigation comes on the heels of President Trump going after another member of the Federal Reserve Board, Lisa Cook, who was appointed by President Biden and is the first Black woman to serve on the Fed, where he directed most likely his administration and the Department of Justice and whatnot to look through her mortgage documents for a house she bought several years ago. And there were, minor inconsistencies in those. And that was this reason to really blow up a person's appointment despite, extensive vetting. And after that, it came out that, members of his own cabinet have the same inconsistencies in their mortgage documents. And yet they're still in office. But with Jay Powell in particular, I think that, interest rates are really high in the US right now, and they are locking, many Americans out of homeownership. They are certainly driving up the cost of capital for businesses who are looking to invest or to build factories or to add jobs. And I think, we can have a frank conversation about the effects and the ramifications of high interest rates, especially in the economy that we have. And it is also true that President Trump's tariffs have made the inflation situation incredibly difficult to get a handle on. Inflation was really coming down when President Trump took office, and we have seen that progress effectively stall out. And if you look at research from the Harvard Pricing Lab, actually inflation would be below the Federal Reserve's 2% target if it weren't for his tariffs. Like, the thing keeping us in this sticky inflation situation is the tariffs. And on top of that, we had a massive injection of fiscal policy last summer with the Republican budget law. If you give a bunch of tax breaks to wealthy, they will in fact spend it, which might push prices up higher. And so taken all of that together, the president is pretty pissed off about high interest rates. Again, we can have a frank conversation about the ramifications of high interest rates, but to weaponize his position to direct an investigation into the Federal Reserve Chair over renovations of a building, that's what this all amounts to, is like whether or not he lied before Congress about renovations to the Federal Reserve's building. I'm actually a couple blocks from it. I've been in the Eccles building, and it's like just deteriorating. I mean, it's an old building that is like, I think one of the two of the buildings has never been renovated. This is just such a non-issue. Like, construction costs are a thing, and it was approved. And it just is so clear that it has nothing to do with the actual thing.
Trump demolished the east wing of the White House without asking anybody permission.
Right. But so it was interesting. So Jay Powell's term as Fed chair is about to be over. And so the president nominated Kevin Warsh, another economist, to fill that position. Kevin Warsh is like such a hack. I mean, it just is so ridiculous. He was a former Fed governor, and he has always been this huge inflation hawk, and would have kept rates much higher during the depths of the Great Recession, which would have made the pain felt in our labor market and by families and workers in America so much worse. And yet now he's in the White House telling the president, of course, I'll, cut rates for you.
Mhm.
And Donald Trump did a really funny interview where he said, of course, I didn't ask Kevin directly to cut rates, but I think he knew what I was saying. And Kevin Warsh was asked if he promised the president to cut rates, and said something to the effect of, we didn't have that discussion, but I think we're aligned or whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think across the board, it just sows a lot of distrust in our economic institutions and whether or not they can, keep our economy running in the favor of workers and families. And when you have a guy who, worked at a couple hedge funds and has advised a couple companies, one of which is, where you can take basically a loan backed on your house equity, and then they can take your house back if you don't pay your credit card bill. I mean, just like real terrible stuff that would put a lot of families in jeopardy. That's who they want leading the Federal Reserve and leading monetary policy in the country, which does, really flow downstream to affect workers' incomes, the prices they pay, and their jobs. And that's where we're at.
Yeah, and it's remarkable that, that appointment was regarded among lots of mainstream media as a reasonable one. It was greeted with some relief because this guy wasn't the most appalling Trumpian candidate that, we could think of. But it's a mark again of, how good Trump is at normalizing radical ideas and manipulating the narrative. And we're so grateful, Liz, to have you to help us, wade through that and get to the truth of things. So thank you, as always, for your time and your generosity in talking to us.
Thanks so much for having me, Emma. Look forward to doing it again.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. If you want some light reading about the Australia-US relationship, my essay, After America, Australia and the New World Order, is available from Australia Institute Press. Pod listeners can use the code PODVP, that's PODVP, at checkout to get free shipping. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can reach us via our email address, which is podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Friday, the 27th of February. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. We'll be back on Wednesday next week. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.